I think we're at a really interesting point in human history, and one that really does call for state R&D in education, learning, and development. So here's 4 reasons why I think our topic today is a really big deal. First of all, we are 2 years into the rise of generative AI and a couple months into the third generation of generative AI that is changing the opportunity set in work, learning, and life. Just beginning to understand what that means. Number two, in the last decade, we've just learned so much about the science of learning and development, how people grow, about how to develop engaging and effective experiences and environments. There's so much that we haven't yet put into practice. Number three, we're experiencing a new set of conditions together in American education, with enrollment down and attendance down and engagement down and regard for higher education down. All of these things, to me, a call for new learning models, new pathways, new experiments. And then finally, with recent shifts at the federal level, it's clear that states are going to need to play a bigger role when it comes to research and development in learning. Today, we're joined by our friends from Transcend and Education Reimagined. My co-host today is Sarah Bishop-Root from EdRe. They recently put out a terrific brief on this subject from the Alliance for Learning. We have featured the Alliance for Learning and their recommendations recently in a podcast. So this is a subject that's really important to us, and we're excited to have Sarah joining us. As she comes on and talks about our guests from Virginia and North Carolina, I'd love to invite all of you that are joining us today to share interesting and important examples of state R&D in the chat as we're speaking, to amplify and add to the number of examples that we're highlighting today. And if you're a frequent guest, you'll know that we make good use of the chat, and we intend to draw a handful of you into this dialogue. Sarah, it's really great to have you, and thanks for hosting us today.
Thank you so much for having us here. And thank you to Getting Smart for creating the space for this conversation. I'm really excited about it today because, as you said, this is the moment that we can really anchor in the education sector about the importance of education R&D and the opportunity states have to lean in and take action about holistically thinking about how systems can support innovation and evidence-based and continuous improvements. Ally partnered with Education Reimagined and Transcend to do a qualitative research exploration of action states can take to really think about the infrastructure and conditions to support education R&D from a systems perspective. I'm really pleased to have on the call today Leslie Caldwell from Transcend, who is the co-researcher and co-author and dear friend in this project. And together, this for us was about how we hold space for the wisdom and expertise across the education sector, really diverse political contexts, to bring their knowledge about what we can do to take action now holistically. So Les, thank you so much. And she'll be interacting with you in the chat and bringing the conversation back around at the end after we hear amazing panelists. So what's remarkable about the panelists we have today, they're incredible leaders. They've served various roles within education, from educators to state leaders to leading organizations that are really taking action. And they bring such a dynamic lens, each of them. So I just want to briefly introduce each of our panelists. So we have really pleased to have join us today Virginia Secretary of Education, Aimee Rogstad Guidera. Secretary of Education Guidera oversees pre-K through post-secondary education in Virginia. Secretary Guidera was the founder and former CEO of the Data Quality Campaign, which that organization is still doing incredible work, and has had an unwavering commitment throughout her career to the importance of leveraging data in education to improve learner outcomes. Secretary Guidera, thanks for joining us. Dr. Karen Sanzo is here with us from Virginia. Dr. Karen Sanzo is the Executive Director of the Center for Educational Innovation and Opportunity at Old Dominion University. She leads the ODU Lab School Network and collaborates with educators, researchers, and designers to advance the center's mission of, I love this, transforming education at the speed of innovation. Dr. Andrew Smith is probably one of the most incredible advocates for education R&D. Currently is a North Carolina Senate Policy Advisor and was formerly the North Carolina Department of Instruction's Deputy State Superintendent, leading their R&D work within the Department of Innovation. And then Dr. Lynn Moody, CEO of Spark North Carolina, and she was formerly a district superintendent between 2 school districts for 15 years. She has had a career of infusing innovation and learner-centered approaches to open doors for igniting possibilities for all learners. Thank you so much, panelists, for being here. And the reason why we selected these 2 states is because we believe, Leslie and I really felt in the brief, if you have a chance to take a look at it, these are 2 states that we uplifted as examples for some of our recommendations. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and we'll just dig in. So we're going to start with North Carolina. I'm going to ask a question to Dr. Smith. Would you please share about how the North Carolina Department of Instruction Office of Innovation became an R&D arm and describes its function?
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Very glad to be with you. And as Sarah mentioned, yes, this is absolutely my passion. And I really got to live out my dream job for about 2.5 years at the agency. And it was my dream job because it's at the intersection of policy, politics, and practitioners. And I got to do it in an ecosystem of innovation. And that to me is really exciting. So that all started though because of a really strategic leader, and that was Superintendent Catherine Truitt, who had the vision to say, hey, I know you've been doing innovation back in your old school system, which Lynn Moody used to lead and was my boss in my first innovation job. I'd like for you to come to the state level and think about what innovation, what R&D could look like for the state of North Carolina. And it was the perfect timing because she was doing a reorg of the agency. And she said to me, here's a master list of here's the org chart. What fits in innovation? And so I was able to work with my colleagues and select a subset of offices that together became the Division of Innovation. Inside of that was the Research and Evaluation arm, our Learning Recovery Office, the North Carolina Virtual Public School, which serves 60,000 kids a year across our state, our Formal Innovative Practices and Programs Office, as well as our Office of Charter Schools. So our division oversaw our 207 charter schools for the state. And so they were really part of our innovation hub as we think about the work of charter schools in North Carolina. So we set on this mission to identify, to codify, to evaluate, really important, and to scale effective innovation in North Carolina. And so our real value proposition was that we were student-centered. So all the innovation we're working on is to drive student outcomes, but we did that by building capacity, using the tenets of the diffusion of innovation, as well as building tools to make it easier for districts and school leaders to do R&D in their own space. And so we did that both at the agency level. So, we weren't just trying to help do R&D out in the field. We also wanted to think differently about inside of our agency. And at that space, we actually developed an in-house tool, and that was working with both our ROI team. The infamous Senator Michael Lee is here distracting me, and he's my new boss and the most innovative senator in this state.
I'm just messing with him. Sorry.
Y'all's thrown me off. And all of my innovative bosses. Yes. And so we had the opportunity to have Power School and Infinite Campus which is our student information system that's across and required across the state. We have every data point known to man, known to children, and we hired in-house qualitative and quantitative researchers. And that allowed us to ask any research question we ever wanted to know. And we would just bebop down the hall and say, hey, quantitative analysts, figure this out. How many days does it take of remote learning in a row before student outcomes start to dip? Because a legislator like Senator Lee asked, I want to develop a policy about remote learning and how many days we can have. We were able to pull that data in. We basically devised 2 tracks. So we had this current track that the systems were operating on. The Division of Innovation operated on this other track, and it was going to be the new, faster track. And we embedded our work inside of various departments so that no matter whether we're there or not, the innovation was designed for the end users. So we developed this like return on investment tool for our finance team and our federal agency team to look specifically at expenditures. We built that in concert with them. Once it was developed and ready, we delivered that over to them. And that's one of the big learnings that we had in our space around how to think about innovation at the agency level. And then lastly, as we thought about the field, we always wanted to try and lift up innovation across the state. You weren't going to find the most innovative practices at the agency. We went out, we curated, we found them, we put them on a master data, like a data sheet, and then a website that was interactive that had both videos and testimonials, one-pagers about innovation across the state so that we could lift that up and evaluate it to make sure it's working at the same time. And so that's just a little bit about the ecosystem that we live in here in North Carolina around the vision innovation.
Thanks, Andrew. I love this notion of creating a parallel track to really allow people to just stay on their daily challenges that they're facing, but supporting them and uplifting them in a really powerful way. I'm going to move on to Dr. Moody. Dr. Moody, would you please tell us about SparkNC and how you would describe the R&D it supports within districts across North Carolina?
Sure. Well, let me just start by saying when Andrew was talking about his bosses, he's been the smart one in this space. So we've always gone to him for advice, and he's helped guide me for a number of years, whether it was at the local district level or when he was at the state, and still now as we proceed with SparkNC. But we're really excited about the work we're doing with SparkNC, and we think it's a real innovative way to do school. We had kind of 2 simultaneous goals. One was to create a pipeline of talent and tech-infused jobs for North Carolina. So we began our work when Apple opened their headquarters in Raleigh, and the buzz on the street and all the social media was that all these jobs would go to people from California, not North Carolina, because we wouldn't be prepared for it. And so we wanted to change that pipeline, particularly having some diversity in that pipeline as they move forward. But as most of you in education know, it starts a lot earlier than college so that they're choosing those careers and feel comfortable in there. So one was in economics for North Carolina. The second part was just this genuine, Andrew and I have been on this pathway for a long time, how we could do school differently, how we could prove that you could change school. So we have 3 pillars at Spark. One is to really be learner-centered, so we could talk all day about what does that actually mean. One is to be industry relevant and how we work with business partners every day. And then one is competency-based. So what does that look like? And along those lines, the big question comes in, what are the outcomes that we're driving for? So when I tell you that one's economics, and one from a talent pipeline, and another area is to really reinvent school and inform other traditional educators about how that could look and why that works for students, then you have to ask different questions. So I just feel strongly that if your strategic direction is around innovation and you're using historical measures for research and development, you're probably going to not get the right answer. I've always been a little afraid of when we would say, oh, we'll just do a survey with students. And the first thing that we'd always say is be careful what you ask for. because they might actually tell you what they want and how they expect to get it. In the research and development arm of what does that mean for SparkNC, how we would measure the outcomes and what are the outcomes. And we spent a great deal of time over the last couple of years talking about those. And we talk about them in more in line of what are the signals that would indicate that we're actually doing what we say. So we have 4 signals that we look at that aren't traditional research and development. One signal is around the learner's sense of belonging. Do they see themselves in these roles? Do they believe that they could be successful in these roles? Do they feel like they're part of something bigger? Do they believe that they can pursue occupations in these high-tech career fields? One is market value asset, and that signal is about, do they actually produce something in our particular units of learning with Spark? Do they actually produce something that is marketable to an employer? And then their success skills and or durable skills, whatever terminology you're using in your state, but are we actually teaching leadership and collaboration? And most importantly to us is, are we teaching ethics in those tech-infused careers? And then lastly, is it really helping them make an informed career decision now that they've had an opportunity? So what we're really proud of in being learner-centered is that it's really driven by the student. They select their learning units. They select the pace in which they are going. And so they don't have this risk of failure with us, but they can try on the hat in these high-tech careers that they're not necessarily comfortable for. And our last results is talking about research and development. Our students, 72% of our learners are now saying that they had little or no interest in pursuing one of those high-tech career fields. And now they have a stronger interest in those since they've experienced SparkNC. So we think that's a great win. We really are doing what we set out to do.
Thank you, Lynn. You know, I'm a SparkNC super fan. Love what you guys are doing. It really is reinventing pathways in an important way. And, you know, my favorite part is just the way the modular curriculum stacks into courses, stacks into pathways, and helps schools, whether they're urban or rural, to deliver against really dynamic new pathway opportunities. Rebecca Holmes from CEI, Colorado Education Initiative, leads really innovative work across the state of Colorado. And she has a question for Andrew. Lynn describes work that is sort of partitioned off by the nature of its organization, which a separate nonprofit funded by the state, but with a given sort of partition that creates the space and opportunity for her to do work. Rebecca wonders, how do you create space when you're working at a state agency? How do you create space for R&D work that is separate and distinct from the statewide work? So how do you initiate it? How do you protect it when it's the state as an actor, Andrew?
Yeah, and so I feel like our approach was that it was a call out. So it was intentional funding for both my position as well as positions within the org chart to do this important work. It was funding for the research analysts. And so we carved out the human resources, but we also carved out kind of the policy space and said, we want you to also do the innovative policy development. And so we kind of made a name for ourselves that we weren't compliant. So you weren't going to find me in your school checking to make sure that you were in school that 6.5 hours every day, right? My job was to come in and to solve problems with you. And it took time. Anybody who's at a state agency knows this. Like there's a level of trust that can or cannot exist. And so we held these convenings where we brought practitioners together across the state. And this was over 4 days. And we really tried to dive into what their challenges were. And then we put our experts with them to solve them. And so it just felt very different from kind of the typical experience that you would have with a state agency where it's just send me your report, your audit's not in on time, very hands-on. And over time, and it took time, we saw a lot of traction with that and folks trusting us to both build tools for them and support them with tricky topics. Federal funding was a great one. Our Office of Learning Recovery, They were the guys who tried to figure out how to say yes to your funding request. Federal programs, that department would say no. Ours would be like, but didn't you just, the law looks like it's gray here. So we tried to be like, we'll find an answer for you. And then we would try to work with our colleagues to convince them of answers.
So many great examples from North Carolina. Sarah, let's shift to Virginia. And why don't you reintroduce our guest from Virginia and tee this up?
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to move on for a question for Secretary of Education Guidera. So Secretary, Virginia has such a strong guiding principles framework. How is education R&D important to Virginia to support education and broader challenges the state is navigating?
Well, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. Thrilled to be here. This is a topic I love because it's all based on evidence and data and using information to find insights and the focus of improvement, which is what in education we have not always done such a great job with. So Sarah mentioned guiding principles. I think you all might put these in the chat, but every decision that we make in Virginia goes back to our guiding principles. I know you all cannot read that, but hopefully you'll go to our website and look at it, or someone will put it up. And there you go. The magic happens. So thank you. And what you'll see in here is that the governor released in May of 2022, a couple months after he was sworn in, this set of guiding principles, and it is on all of our walls. I have big copies everywhere, and every decision we make goes back to this. And what's important to talk about is that you'll see innovation on here as one of our guiding principles, but it's not innovation for the sake of innovation. It's innovation as it relates to our overriding goal, which is to ensure that we are preparing every Virginian for success in life. And how do we do that? We do that with high expectations, with focus on readiness for work, for military, for further education. And so we're very, very discerning about how we do things, and undergirding everything we do is a commitment to use information, not as a tool, as many of you know, the Data Equality Campaign, not as a tool of shame and blame or a hammer, but as a tool of enlightenment and empowerment and improvement. And that's, to me, what R&D is all about, right? Is how do you try new things, but with a focus and a commitment to being honest about what works and doesn't work, so that we can look at what we find out with those data and say, so what does this data or this experiment or this R&D tell us? And now what do we do differently to get better results? And I've always called this the holy grail in education because, to be blunt, we really don't do this very well in education. We've gotten great at having good information, right? That's a new thing the last 20 years. We're talking about how to use it, but this whole idea of how do you actually use information, especially the powerful insights from research and development activities, and then shape what you do differently in the future and go to scale, is something that is just in its infancy. And we need more networks like this. So let me tell you a little bit about why in Virginia we're doing this and how we've done this. I'm actually going to use the 5 pillars that are in the great brief that everyone has, and I think that's in the chat already. I'm thinking about how we framed what we did in Virginia before we turned to Karen, who's just been an extraordinary partner and a huge part of what we're doing here in Virginia. One is the vision and goals, and that's what I just talked about, right? That we're innovating and using research, development, and data, not for the sake of just saying we're using it, but because it fuels our goal of making sure that we see every single student of Virginia, we meet them where they are, and we get them what they need to be successful. You cannot do that with longitudinal data, and that is why I'm a passionate advocate for having longitudinal data, is it allows you to see every single child and meet them and to personalize education. This focus on innovation is critical because we know from the data that we are not serving every child well in Virginia and anywhere in this country, because the one-size-fits-all approach to education is not working, and we need to recognize that there are different ways of education that meet different students' needs. And that was really at the heart of why innovation was part of our guiding principle wheel, what we're doing. And so one of the things I know Karen will talk about is the launch of lab schools, right? In Virginia, we have had very few choices within our system. You know, we have 7 charter schools. There has not been a charter school created in the last 2 decades. We have very little choice. So we have no choice outside of schools. We have an education improvement scholarship tax program as the extent. So we have very few choices for parents to make in there. And so the governor came in saying, how do we have greater choices for families and students within the public system, and at the same time spark innovation? And bottom line, give people permission to build the schools that they themselves want to teach in, that they want to lead in, that they want their kids to go to, and that they want to hire people out of. And that was the whole reason for building on these lab schools. Real briefly, the lab school initiative had to be led by higher education, partnering with local school divisions, and then bringing in community partners on that. And I'll get to that later on in the pieces. But the second principle that's listed in the brief is there needs to be dollars to do this, right? And so when we created these lab schools initiative, we also in a bipartisan way put $100 million into a innovation fund, which was to fuel the planning grants, the implementation grants, and the startup grants that were necessary for these schools to go. And again, Karen will go into more detail, but we will have 15 of these schools that will be up and running and with students in them by September of this year, which is awesome. We have 6 right now running and they are extraordinary. And you can go online and look at more of them, but they're great. But money matters, right? You need to have incentives and you need to be able to support that. The third piece in the brief talks about the importance of also just looking at the regulations, looking at the realities when you start doing innovation. And I'm also really proud to say that part of what we've done in Virginia through legislation is that we have taken away some of the barriers that we know are necessary to putting interesting ideas into reality. So we've passed in a bipartisan way reforms on both transportation and on seat time regulations so that it makes it much easier for people to think creatively about how do we use time differently and how do we use transportation differently if we want people to go to different schools, different options, do dual enrollment, go to our lab schools, do work-based learning to get experience, right? We try to take some of those barriers down while at the same time holding ourselves accountable for ensuring that mastery and proficiency and acquisition of skills, knowledge, and competencies is critical to everything we do. But how do we get looser so that it's easier for people to be innovative and not have to color inside the lines? And then the last two go together, right? How do you build a culture for innovation and the relationships and the importance of it? And so much of this is about the culture is I work for a boss, my governor, who comes out of a career in the business community, and not a single decision in this administration gets made without saying, start with the data. Where are we? And measure it. Bring your data. In God we trust, all others bring data. Where do we want to go? And how do we measure that success so that we can keep ourselves honest? And then the second question always is, who's best in class as determined by the data? And then how do we learn from them and bring it back and make it the Virginia way? To me, that's the innovation cycle right there, right? You've got to be honest with where you are. You got to be able to identify where you're going, identify the challenges, and learn. And so this culture of innovation, of success, but also of transparency and accountability for results is absolutely critical to R&D, right? And this whole idea of just doing R&D for the sake of saying you're doing it leads you to a whole lot of nowhere. If anyone ever wants to get an underscore of that, go to an AAR meeting and look at all the research that's being done that is completely useless and is a waste of time, energy, and money. And that great research needs to be, what are the burning questions that we have? And in my mind, every question in education needs to start and end with, does this thing, whatever we're going to research, actually improve student outcomes? That is all I care about. Every decision we make in this administration is on that, and every investment of dollars we make answers that question. And then the relationship piece, as I mentioned with the lab school piece, we didn't say go to school divisions and say, go dream up a better mousetrap by yourself. We said, build the schools that you need in your community. And we invited communities to come together and say, what do you need? How do you do this? How do you build on these assets? And so what we have are lab schools that look completely different depending on where they are. So we have a space lab school out on the Eastern Shore where we have Wallops Island launching things into space. And we have a huge crisis in terms of not being able to attract, nuclear physicists to move out there because our school system isn't meeting their families' needs and we don't have enough people to hire. We've got a Southwest HEALS because in the Southwest, we have an entire crisis about healthcare and pipelines for healthcare pieces. And so we have hospitals coming together. We've got NASA coming in. So we've got community members coming together and building things. And that what's core to this, and Karen will again talk to this more, is throughout we are putting the R&D piece into this development so that we're going to be learning about what works and that we've built a network that's going to learn together. I'll close by saying the relationships and the culture piece is that you also have to be so discerning about how do you make sure you build a culture that's a learning enterprise in of itself. And that's why we were so pleased that ODU is leading the outside of government approach to this, outside the education area, by making sure that there is a home for innovation and opportunity for education in Virginia that resides at one of our great universities and is tasked with really building this network, not just of lab schools, but all kinds of innovation that's happening across. And we at the same time created, when we released this wheel at the same time, an Office of Innovation within the Department of Education. And those two offices will work together. So that's a culture, right? You cannot mandate culture change. You need to build it. And you build it by bringing people together and giving them permission to color outside the lines and give them really clear goals about where they need to go, and then say, go, just go do it and try things, but let's learn at all times. So we're really excited about what we're building. It's awesome to see what's happened in a short period of time to go from a concept in January of 2022 to actually having students finishing their first year of lab schools 3 years later. And it's all done because we have some incredible people across this Commonwealth who, when given permission to think differently, think outside the box, just flew. And I think that that is the point right now we're in with education. We're ready. We just need to give ourselves permission to do things differently and keep our eyes on the North Star of making sure we're preparing every child for success.
Thank you, Secretary Guidera. Wow. Thank you so much for connecting it back to the brief. And I mean, I think really hitting on the infrastructure and conditions that were highlighted. We'll turn it over to Dr. Sanzo. So your role is so much more than an intermediary. You're a visionary. You're really connected. You're a professor. You're doing so much, but please share about the center, its partnership with the governor's office and the Virginia Department of Education, and how the lab program is getting implemented.
Yeah, sure. Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I want to highlight that I have the ability to be here and I'm in front of people, but as with anything, the center has an amazing team behind all of the work that's really helping make this happen at Old Dominion University and across the state. So the Center for Educational Innovation and Opportunity serves as the hub for coordinating the lab school network. As mentioned, we have 15 lab schools across the state right now. 6 started this year, 9 are launching next year. And as you can appreciate, the work that goes into lifting up a school is nuanced. It's very busy day to day. It's really the technical pieces of standing up that school. And sometimes you feel like islands, right? So your islands out there in the ocean. One of our lab schools is maritime, so we like to lean into some of those. And what we do at the center is we're able to bring those islands together and to create this large continent where we're interacting together, learning from one another. The center, we are able to coordinate the cultivation of best practices, sharing these best practices across the state. We come together in learning walks across lab schools that we have, as well as leaning into some of the schools that are in the Commonwealth. And tomorrow, some of our team will be engaged in a learning walk at a high school in Virginia Beach, and they're coming together to think about what is innovation. So as we heard earlier, what are those outcomes? One of the things that we're doing at the center is thinking about what do we actually mean by innovation and instructional innovation, and how are we measuring our growth, and how are we ideating around that and evolving the work and bringing the 15 schools together. As well as Secretary Guidera mentioned, we don't want to keep the knowledge within just these 15 schools. This is a significant and amazing investment from the state, and we want to ensure that we are learning and sharing this across the Commonwealth as well as nationwide. Also at the center, we're able to provide technical expertise or be responsive and help to identify that technical expertise in areas that all of the schools need. So it might be STEM, it might be scheduling, it might be computer science. So the answer's in the room, and whether it's the actual technical knowledge in the room right now, but we can help identify that. And the other piece is that scaling piece. So how do we learn? How do we research? How do we scale innovation? We like to work around the networked improvement community work. We call ourselves networked innovation communities, and we want to cultivate that. One of the pieces that we're launching coming up in the next month is our collaboration grants for research on innovative practices. That's a mouthful, where we are having cross-lab school research that will take place across the upcoming year. The lab schools are putting in proposals now, and we have a team that we've drawn from lab schools from Old Dominion University itself that will help support the research that's taking place. And then to be able to share it at Next Innovation Summit. This past April, we had hundreds of educators from across the state that came to Old Dominion University. It was a wonderful partnership. Secretary Guidera was there to be able to help launch the work. We had the Virginia Department of Education there. We had Sophia McDaniel, who has really been helping us day to day from the Department of Ed. And I just want to emphasize, this doesn't happen without collaboration and partnership and the multi-stakeholder process that's involved. And so the hundreds of educators came, learned about the lab schools, as well as other innovative processes. And then we're bringing them into the networked innovation community so that we're able to help push into their schools, learn from them, so that we really create this robust community of practice.
Thanks, Dr. Sanzo. One of the things that Secretary Guidera mentioned was the incredible appropriations for this work. I know that you shared with Les and I that the planning grant component of that was very critical to the work. Could you speak to that a little bit for us, please?
Sure, absolutely. As you heard from the Secretary, this initiative launched in 2022, and it was really important for us to have this runway of resources and time. And the money is great. What that enabled us to do was to have the time, the personnel to come together, to learn from stakeholders, to bring in city, government, school districts, universities. In some cases, there are multiple universities, colleges, community colleges that are partnering together, as well as bringing in industry. And to be able to think deeply and contextually about the needs of our students, of the community in which they serve, so that we can thoughtfully design the schools to meet the needs of the community. As the Secretary mentioned, the Aerospace Academy of the Eastern Shore is an example where NASA Wallops Island has come in. We're going to take our students out to see rocket launches so they can see the tangible product of their work. If we didn't have the time to launch that school, I'm not sure we would really have the infrastructure that's necessary to be successful. So the gift of time, I cannot overemphasize how wonderful that opportunity has been for us to thoughtfully design and implement the work.
Thank you so much. And before I turn it back over to Tom, I just want to, Leslie, I wanted to just get your thoughts. Is there anything else from what we've heard today from both states that you think is important to emphasize in correlation to the brief and its recommendations?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And hi, everyone. I'm Leslie from Transcend. I had the honor of partnering with Sarah to explore challenges and opportunities for state education R&D. And you can see why we highlighted North Carolina and Virginia. So just thank you to these 4 leaders for highlighting and sharing your approaches. You know, Sarah, one of the things that we really wanted to do with the brief was like bring state education R&D to life through these examples. And I think we also wanted to demonstrate that there's no one way to go about this work. So no matter what a state's governance structure, political environment, state priorities around education, there is an entry point to be a leader on innovation and R&D. And, you know, I just want to say there's so many things that we've heard that align with some of the key themes and the recommendations in the brief. I think we've heard about how important a unifying vision and like guiding principles are that really center innovation and R&D. We heard about the importance of leaders and champions for this work. So those who are on this call, but also, you know, governors, policymakers. I think Secretary Guidera's point about you just can't ignore culture and mindset change and the role of state leaders and really setting the tone and creating the conditions for innovation. That's so important. We heard from Andrew about how important dedicated capacity is to hold innovation and research and evaluation. And I think what's also come through quite a bit is the importance of networks and partnerships between the state education agency, higher ed, communities. Andrew referred to this as like the ecosystem of innovation in the state. Karen's talking about how regularly different stakeholders are coming together in Virginia and really talking about shared goals and measures. And so I just love the picture that you all are painting for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Les. Tom, back to you. Questions from the audience that we want to bring to our panelists?
We have lots of great comments and questions. Jim Flanagan's been talking about the challenge of new measures. Innovation often has the dual aim of increasing traditional measures, but also promoting growth on new dimensions. An example would be Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. We're all early leaders in adopting a portrait of a graduate. They've laid out a broader set of learning goals. Those were stated, but we still don't have great measures for many of the dimensions across the portrait of a graduate. So an innovation agenda could aim both at promoting development of those measures, but it could also be focused on better measures of creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. So just acknowledging that. Andrew, anything you want to add on that? The challenge of not only promoting innovation, but measuring its effectiveness in categories that we're not very good at yet.
Yeah, I mentioned we tried to do like the tools, but also the policy. So as we were designing our portrait of a graduate, we also decided the measures weren't right. And so we introduced almost a 2-year process to redesign our school performance grades in North Carolina that had a myriad of new things involved. The number of kids who are employed, enlisted, and enrolled, measuring the durable skills. And one of the things that I'm really excited that still lives on at the agency is a federal grant we received where we partnered with ETS and Carnegie to come together to develop new AI-driven tools to measure at scale those portrait of a graduate skills. And so we got an R&D grant from the feds, still intact as of today, I believe. And they will be doing that work over the next 3 years to build a system that really truly measures it reliably and in a valid way, durable skills.
And so we have just finished our redo of our accountability system, which we're calling our school performance and support framework. And much like what Andrew just described in North Carolina, we want it to be, like I said, everything focused on, are we preparing people to be ready for life? And we also have built into that new accountability system readiness measures at elementary level, middle school, and high school. And much like North Carolina, we are now giving credit not for people getting a whiff of work-based learning or a whiff of college experience. It is you only get credit in the accountability system for the school by the number of students who actually earn an industry recognized high demand credential, not just basket weaving or something else, or credit, college credit, and or an associate's degree, and or military readiness, be able to pass the ASVAB. The one in the middle school is really interesting because what we wanted to be able to do, that as we start talking about blowing up the one-size-fits-all system, middle school is critical to doing that. And so we have created at the middle school level, and this gets directly to the question of how do we test all these profiles of a graduate in a way that says this matters to master it. And so we have created, or in the process of creating, a performance-based assessment that starts with every 8th grader after working with our newly retrained guidance counseling and teachers to look in 8th grade, and every 8th grader will produce an academic and career plan that starts with the students looking at our Virginia Office of Education Economics data, which is, I think, the nation's leading labor market information system right now that's accessible to everyone and anyone about what the regional job demands are. So it starts with students being able to know where to access that information and use it and analyze it. And then we have a new outcomes portal at our state higher education agency, the SHEV. If you go Google college outcomes in Virginia at SHEV, you'll find this, and it provides extraordinary outcomes, labor market progression, how long it took, whatever. And what we're going to be doing is linking all those things together so that our students will be able to identify the top jobs that they're interested in, and then be able to identify the multiple ways and pathways and financial aid that allows you to access those different pathways and understand there's not a one pathway, there's not a one size. Here are the options and here are the outcomes. So people, families, and students can make great conversations, and at the same time be able to use those 5 C's, right? Of being able to research, to present, to analyze, all those thoughts in there. So we're moving and trying to measure things differently, but also have it count, because it's the skills that prepare you for life.
As we wrap this up, I want to invite each of you to give a tweet-length answer to a tough question, like why should we prioritize state R&D now? In so many places, budgets are down, enrollments are down. It's a tough time to make R&D a priority. But I'm going to start with Secretary Guidera. What's your response? Why is state R&D a priority?
Because what we're doing right now is not serving every child. And until we do that, we have got to do things differently. And you got to do it by actually figuring out what works.
Dr. Sanzo, what would you add to that?
I think it is actually an investment in our students in the future. And I think too, it's cultivating, this is not a tweet length, but it brings in more educators into the process because then they're able to better study their own practices and make revisions that are going to help support all kids.
I love that. Dr. Smith, why prioritize state R&D now?
Well, I guess I'll borrow from Plato and make it a little more innovative, but something about necessity is the mother of innovation. I think we're just at a time where we need to think differently, and R&D will help us both think about ROI and what really works.
And Lynn Moody, I want to make this harder, and not only for a state, but for school districts. You've led a number of really great school districts. Why should states and school districts prioritize R&D right now?
I'll just keep hammering on this, that as long as you have a strategic direction that is around innovation, but your evaluation system or your research and development measures something different, it will always trump the strategic direction. So we'll never get to innovation unless we look at it differently. So it's critically important that now we think about different measures, different outcomes, different ways of thinking about how students are learning, including asking a student if they believe they're doing quality work.
Sarah, why don't you take us out with your tweet on the importance of state R&D? What do you and this brief that we're celebrating today have to say on that subject?
We have the Alliance for Learning Innovation on right now, so I'd just like to give Sarah Shapiro or Timothy a chance to share. I mean, they're really building a national coalition right now and have a view at the federal level, at the state level, at the community level. So I'd love to hear from one of them.
All right, Sarah, you get 60 seconds to expand on your...
We think this work is critically important for all the reasons people were talking about at the federal level. If it's not happening in the ways that we are hoping, states are doing extraordinary work, and you're building demand for what the federal government needs to do to support your work in data and sort of R&D investments. So it's this virtuous cycle of amazing work happening at the state level and helping the federal government better define its role in R&D in this time of great policy change.
I mean, I think right now, like, we can transform systems that are driven by trust and empowerment of communities, by elevating really what every learner needs to have in a successful future. And it's a system-wide effort. Like, we can't just think about this in the context of one-off innovation or instructional improvement just for instructional improvement. We need to think about this really anchored in how do we transform systems so that they can become systems of learning that therefore result in powerful transformation. And I think thinking about this holistically, what you'll find in the recommendations in the brief, is so critical. So we're not having the hamster wheel conversations over and over again about why we're not seeing the results that we really want to see for every learner in the United States of America. And as I started in this call, like, this is a collective effort. It has to happen across systems. It has to happen in partnership with other sectors. It has to happen in partnership with communities. It has to happen in partnership at the federal level for us really to see meaningful change and prepared systems for the future of this country. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Please check out the brief. Sign up at Ally if you want to get their notifications, and great information is there. They continue to build this coalition. Les and I are moving into phase 2 of this work, so we would love to hear from you to contribute. This is really about the collective voice of the education sector, and we're just holding space for it. So please reach out to us if you want to engage in how we move forward with our work. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate you and the EdRe team. Thanks to Transcend. Sarah, thanks to the Ally and for your great work. Mason, take us out.